Hey everyone. Have you noticed how much more expensive it is to go to university these days?
It's definitely a hot topic, and it's not just affecting students here at home.
Yeah, it seems like it's a global trend, and today we're going to zero in on what's happening in the UK.
Right.
Their international student tuition fees are going way up.
Yeah.
And we've got this interesting article from University World News called Warnings on Unsustainable International Tuition Fee Hikes.
Interesting title.
It is, and it
Yeah.
really dives into this whole situation,
Yeah.
like what's causing it, what the impact might be.
Right.
And I think one of the big takeaways is that these rising fees could actually backfire on UK universities.
Yeah, it's a complex situation.
It is.
Because on one hand, universities are facing financial pressure.
Right.
They're not getting as many international students as they used to.
Yeah, and the article mentioned the University of York as an example.
Right.
They actually increased their fees by 12%,
Wow.
but they still ended up with 500 fewer international students.
So even though they're bringing in more money per student,
Yeah.
the overall revenue might not be what they hoped for.
Yeah, and even though they brought in more revenue from international student fees,
Right.
they still ended up having to make cuts elsewhere.
They did.
Their deficit went down, but it was still a deficit of £6 million.
Oof.
Yeah, and then there's the University of Manchester.
Yeah, they're a bit of a different story.
Right. They actually saw a surplus.
They did. But when you look closer,
Yeah.
their own annual report shows they really depended on raising fees for international students to get that surplus.
That's interesting.
And they also had fewer international students, especially at the postgraduate level.
So it seems like they're kind of caught in this loop
Yeah, like a vicious cycle.
where they need to increase revenue, so they raise fees,
Right.
but that might scare off the very students they need to make that money.
Exactly. A
Yeah.
tricky balance.
Yeah, and then the big question is like, why are fewer international students choosing the UK anyway?
Well, the article brings up a few different reasons.
Okay.
One is that after the pandemic, a lot of other study abroad destinations have reopened.
Right.
So there are more options available now.
Makes sense.
Then there's the issue of UK visa policies.
Yeah, that can be a big hurdle.
It can.
And then there are global political shifts happening.
Yeah, the world's a different place than it was a few years ago.
It is.
And of course, there's competition from other countries,
Like the US, Canada.
you name it.
Yeah, countries are really vying for those international students.
Right, they see the value they bring,
Absolutely.
both academically and economically.
Totally. And it feels like this whole strategy of just raising fees to fix the problem.
Yeah,
It just doesn't seem sustainable long term.
that's a big concern that the article highlights.
Yeah.
David Pillsbury, who's an expert in international education, he actually uses this really striking phrase, killing the golden goose.
Ooh. I like that.
Yeah, it paints a picture, right?
It does.
He's basically saying that if universities keep raising prices without dealing with those other problems we talked about,
Right.
they might end up making things worse in the long run.
Pricing themselves out of the market.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And it's not just about the money either,
Oh, that's a good point.
because there's also the issue of reputation.
Right.
The article quotes Dr. Janet Ileva,
Okay.
and she's worried that all these constant fee hikes
Yeah.
could make universities look, well, a bit greedy.
Yeah. Like they're just focused on profits.
Yeah, and that's not exactly a good look.
No, it makes them seem less welcoming to international students.
Yeah, exactly.
Like they're not really valuing them for who they are.
Right. It becomes more transactional.
And it's interesting because even the Office for Students,
assess.
yeah, the regulatory body for higher education in England, they're also urging caution.
They are.
They're predicting a huge increase in tuition fee income over the next few years.
Like almost 50% over 4 years.
Wow.
But a lot of that's going to come from international student fees.
So they're basically saying, don't get too comfortable.
Yeah, don't assume that those international student numbers will just keep going up.
Right. They're saying, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Exactly. And they're particularly worried about how economic conditions in other countries might affect things.
Oh, like if there's a recession in a country that sends a lot of students to the UK.
Right. That could have a big impact.
So it sounds like everyone's kind of waiting to see what happens next.
Yeah, there's this sense of uncertainty in the air.
Like we're on the edge of something.
Yeah, maybe a turning point.
Yeah, and what if those international student numbers do keep dropping?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
One expert, Dave Emmore, he thinks we might see a shift in the demographics of international students.
Okay, what does that mean?
So students who aren't as worried about cost, like maybe some Chinese students,
Okay.
they might still choose the UK.
Okay.
But students who are more focused on affordability,
Okay.
like many Indian students,
Right.
they might start looking elsewhere.
Hmm. That makes sense.
And if that happens, UK universities could become less competitive.
Compared
The
to
US, Canada,
all
Australia.
those other big
Yeah,
players.
yeah, you got it.
So it's not just about losing students,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
about losing their edge.
Exactly.
And Amor also brought up the potential impact on global rankings,
Ah, yes, the rankings.
like the QS World University rankings.
Those are really influential,
They are.
especially for international students.
Yeah, they're a big deal.
And remember how the University of York increased their fees but lost students?
Yeah.
Well, they also dropped in the QS rankings last year.
Oh, wow. So it all kind of ties together.
It does.
So we've got declining student numbers
Right.
leading to fee hikes,
Uh-huh.
which could make UK universities less attractive
Yeah.
and hurt their global standing.
And on top of all that,
Oh, yeah, there's more.
international students are facing even more costs.
Like,
Increased study visa costs
oh, right.
and that National Health Service surcharge.
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is.
So it's like a whole bunch of financial pressures all hitting at once.
Exactly. It's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, and to really understand what's going on,
Yeah.
we need to look at it from the perspective of key student markets.
Like China, for example.
Yeah, China's huge.
It is.
And the article has some insights from Dr. Cheryl Yu.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah, she's the co-founder of Higher Education Connected.
Right.
And she talks about how Chinese students and their families are becoming much more focused on the return on investment of their education.
They want to make sure they're getting their money's worth,
Exactly.
which makes sense,
Totally.
especially with the rising cost of studying in the UK.
Yeah, they're starting to think twice.
They are.
And they're considering other options.
Right, like regional programs in Asia
Okay.
or even local international education programs.
Interesting. So they don't necessarily have to go abroad anymore.
Not necessarily.
They can get that international experience closer to home.
Exactly.
And those QS rankings that we talked about, Dr. Yu points out that they're super important for Chinese employers.
It's like a stamp of approval.
It is.
And with fewer UK universities in the top 100,
Yeah.
they become less attractive to those top students.
Makes sense. They want the best of the best.
They do.
And they want their credentials to be recognized globally.
Right.
So it sounds like we're seeing a shift in preferences.
We are.
What are some of those other options that Chinese students are looking at?
Well, there are things like foundation years.
Foundation years.
Yeah, they're basically a way to bridge the gap
Oh, okay.
between a student's current qualifications
Uh-huh.
and what they need to get into university.
Oh, so it's like a prep year.
You can think of it that way.
Okay.
Then there are branch campuses.
Branch campuses.
Yeah, these are overseas extensions of existing universities,
Okay.
often offering degrees from the main institution, but at a lower cost.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then there are transnational education programs.
Okay, those sound complicated.
They can be.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's about partnerships
Partnership.
between institutions in different countries.
Okay.
So students can earn a degree from a foreign university
Yeah.
while studying locally.
Oh, wow. So there are all these different options emerging.
There are.
It's not just about picking a country anymore.
Right. It's about finding the right fit.
And it feels like UK universities are kind of stuck.
In what way?
Like they're being pushed towards these short-term solutions
Uh-huh.
instead of addressing the bigger picture.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like they're just trying to fill the budget gaps now
Yeah.
without really thinking about the long-term consequences.
Exactly.
I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get a little worried about all this.
It is concerning.
What do you think, listener?
Are you feeling the same way?
Are these trends happening where you are?
It would be interesting to hear your perspective.
Yeah, let us know what you think.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder about the long-term impact.
Yeah, like what happens if these trends just keep going?
Right? Is this the new normal for international education?
And is it only going to get worse for the UK?
Well, some students might start choosing those other popular destinations instead.
Like the US or Canada?
Yeah, but what about the students who can't afford those places?
Right. They'll either have to stay home or maybe look at those regional hubs that Dr. Yu mentioned.
Exactly. That could actually lead to oh yeah, that's a big part of studying abroad.
Like experiencing new cultures, meeting people from different backgrounds.
Exactly. So if more students are choosing to study closer to home,
Yeah,
will we see less of that kind of cross-cultural exchange?
that's a good question.
Or will new forms of exchange emerge?
Right, like maybe more virtual collaboration or partnerships between institutions in different regions.
Exactly. It's hard to predict, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, it's like this one change could trigger a whole chain reaction,
It could.
reshaping the entire landscape of higher education.
It's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it.
It is, but Let's circle back to the UK for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about the challenges they're facing, but what about solutions?
Yeah, is there a way out of this mess?
Could they just lower those fees again?
Well, that's probably not realistic.
Why not?
Remember, the Office for Students is predicting that a lot of future revenue growth for universities will come from international student fees.
Oh.
So even if they wanted to, lowering fees might not be financially sustainable.
So they're kind of stuck.
In a way, yes.
But they can't just keep squeezing that golden goose.
No, that's not a long-term strategy.
So what other options do they have?
I think it goes beyond just tweaking fees.
Okay.
It's about rethinking their whole approach to international education.
Like taking a step back and asking...
What are our goals?
Yeah. And is it just about the money?
Or is there something more?
What do you think their vision should be?
Well, if they want to stay competitive
Yeah.
and attract those top international students,
Mm-hmm.
they need to offer more than just a degree, a truly enriching experience,
Okay.
something that justifies the cost.
Makes sense.
So that might mean investing in innovative programs,
Okay.
creating more scholarship opportunities,
Right.
or even collaborating with institutions in other countries
Oh, interesting.
to offer more affordable pathways.
So it's about creating value for international students,
Exactly.
not just extracting it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about the students themselves?
What do you mean?
Like if someone's listening to this and they're thinking about studying in the UK,
Right.
what advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's more important than ever to do your research.
Okay.
Don't just look at the rankings.
Right.
Look at the overall value proposition.
What does that mean?
Think about things like,
Okay.
does the university offer programs that align with your interests?
Right.
What kind of support do they provide for international students?
Yeah, like is there a strong international student community?
Exactly. And crucially, can you afford it?
Without going broke.
Exactly.
That's a good point.
Don't put yourself in a difficult financial situation.
And speaking of affordability,
Yeah.
what about online learning?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Could that be a more affordable option for international students?
It could be.
Especially for those who can't afford to travel and live abroad.
Right.
Hmm.
We've already seen a huge increase in online learning,
We have.
and it definitely has the potential to make education more accessible.
But,
But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool.
oh, that's a good point.
It can be used in different ways.
Right. It can either reinforce existing inequalities,
Yeah.
or it can help break down barriers.
Exactly.
It depends on how it's used.
And who has access to it?
Right. So it's not a simple solution.
No, it's not.
And it brings us back to those bigger questions about the purpose of higher education.
Yeah, like, is it primarily a business
Focused on profit,
or is it a public good
a driver of innovation.
and social progress?
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
What stands out to you the most?
I think for me, it's this idea of a potential turning point.
Yeah.
Like UK universities are at a crossroads.
Okay.
They can keep going down this path of raising fees,
Yeah.
risking pricing themselves out of the market,
Right.
or they can try something different,
Like what?
a more innovative and sustainable approach, focused on creating value and enriching experiences for international students.
That sounds a lot better.
It does, doesn't it?
I agree. And this isn't just about the UK.
No, it's a global conversation.
It is.
The choices that universities and governments make today,
Yeah.
they're going to shape the future of higher education.
For everyone.
Exactly. So what do you think, listener?
What kind of future do you want to see? Yeah, it's easy to focus on all the negative stuff, but maybe this is a chance for something good to happen.
Yeah, like a wake-up call.
Exactly. Like maybe this whole situation will force universities to rethink things
To be more innovative.
and to really prioritize what matters.
Yeah, like maybe it's time to move away from relying so heavily on international student fees.
It does seem like they're putting all their eggs in one basket.
And that's risky.
It is.
What if that basket breaks?
Exactly. They need a more sustainable funding model.
Yeah, one that doesn't pressure them to keep increasing enrollment no matter what.
Right. Because that can lead to all sorts of problems. Like lowering academic standards or neglecting other important areas.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance.
It is. And it makes me think about that golden goose analogy again. It's
Yeah.
like they're trying to get as much out of it as possible right now.
Yeah, instead of thinking about the long-term health of the goose.
What do you think, listener?
Do you see this happening in other areas of life?
Where people are so focused on short-term gains that they forget about the bigger picture.
It's a good question to think about.
And it brings us back to that fundamental question.
About the purpose of higher education.
Yeah. Is it just a business?
Or is it something more?
Like a public good that benefits everyone?
Right, a driver of innovation and social progress.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
We've talked about the challenges, the potential consequences, and even some possible solutions.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, what's the next step?
Well, we don't have all the answers.
Of course not.
But I think one thing is clear.
What's that?
The future of higher education is not set in stone.
Okay.
It's something that we're all shaping together.
Through our choices.
Our investment.
And our priorities.
Exactly.
It's
So
not-
what can we do as individuals?
Yeah, should we just sit back and watch this all happen?
Or can we actually make a difference?
I think we can make a difference.
I agree.
As students, as educators, as members of society.
We can all play a role.
Like, we can talk about these issues.
Yeah, have conversations like this one.
We can advocate for policies that support accessible and equitable education.
And we can make informed choices about where we study, where we work, and how we contribute to the world.
It's about taking responsibility.
For ourselves and for the future of higher education.
Exactly. And I think that's a key takeaway from our deep dive today.
It's not just about understanding the problem
It's about imagining what's possible.
and working towards a better future.
A future where education is a force for good in the world.
So keep thinking about these questions.
Keep exploring.
Keep learning.
And keep pushing for a future where knowledge is accessible to everyone.
The world needs your ideas
Your passion.
and your commitment to making a difference.
And who knows?
Maybe you'll be the one to discover that next breakthrough,
That next innovation.
that next step towards a more equitable and enlightened future.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We hope you found it insightful
Thought-provoking.
and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time.
Keep those minds curious.